Om Jnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Nena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha.
It's a pleasure to be here with all of you who come here specifically to cultivate the spirit. And by doing that, all good things naturally come to our lives just by attending to the spirit soul or the Atma. We have a very short duration of life. The Srimad Bhagavatam is a book that's just to my left here. It says that it's very rare to get a human life. Labvam sudurlabhamidam bahusam bhavante. It comes only after millions and millions of births in many species of life. And that when one gets the opportunity of the human life, one has an opportunity, even though it's a temporary life, to achieve the highest goal. And in this book, the Srimad Bhagavatam, which actually takes place during a great crisis, which is that the emperor of the world was going to die in 7 days, and he gave up his kingdom and he sat down on the bank of the Ganges to figure out what to do with the last 7 days of life. And although someone might hear that and think, well, I have a lot longer than 7 days to live, who can actually count on that? In fact, we all have 7 days to live because there's Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, or Sunday, and one of those days we'll receive a call or a sign, and sometimes it goes quickly or slowly, but we will unceremoniously have to leave the present body that we're in. And this is the state in which the king is asking questions to the great saint, Shukadeva Goswami. And it's in the context of this that the story of Gajendra is being recounted. There are many such stories in the Srimad Bhagavatam, but Gajendra is so relatable because he had everything that he needed. He was the king of the elephants. He had a beautiful family. He was in the perfect location. And then suddenly, everything changed. So many of us might have the experience that you have a full tank of gas and your refrigerator at home is fully stocked and everything seems to be going perfectly well. Shri Shri Radha Govinda Ji ki jai, Shri Shri Ramithai ki jai, Jai Jagannath Baladev Subhadra Ji ki jai. In fact, on the East Coast, there's a phrase that people say when they're driving their car around and they've got not a care in the world. They lean over and they drive with one hand, lean out the window, full tank of gas, just got your car washed. They call it copping a lean. He's copping a lean, he's leaning out the window, he's driving the car with one hand, leaning back, the radio blasting, everything's going just fine. Just like Gajendra, he was copping a lean. He was a little intoxicated, says the Srimad Bhagavatam. Nice family, beautiful place, goes in the crystal clear water, everything should be fine. And it was until a crocodile grabs his leg. And then he struggled for 1,000 years. And there's a juncture at which, a time when it comes into the mental system that I can't win this fight. That will come to every one of us. There's an impetus for life, and every moment I'm trying to stay alive, one way or the other. In fact, the Vedas say that it's a really hard struggle. I just don't notice it. I'm taking it for granted. And I've forgotten how hard it is just to stay alive in this environment. But there is one point at which I'll be faced with that time I have to exit the body. And in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says that there's a process that takes place then. He says, Ukramantam stitam vapi bhunjanam vavananvitam vimuna nanapashyanti pashyanti gyanachakshusha. First he describes leaving the body as ukramantam. Krama means to step. And this process of death is like stepping out of the body. And he says that a person whose eyes are trained in knowledge can understand what's taking place. And earlier in the Bhagavad Gita he says that one who's practiced yoga will be ready for such a change. Like in the 8th chapter, which is all about the process of leaving the body, which sounds like a very morbid topic. And if you don't believe me, when you go home for the holidays, just bring it up around the dinner table and see if anybody's interested in talking about the time of death. Generally not a topic that people embrace, taboo to talk about death, but Krishna goes into the great detail about death. It's generally a great mystery, what it is and what happens. But in the Bhagavad Gita he says that it's the residents of the body leaving the body and going to another place. And one can consider that if you move into a residence and you know you have a limited amount of time, like say you have an apartment for 30 days, and that's all you have. You don't spend a lot of time going down to Office Depot to buy new supplies and fix it up and so forth, because you know there's a limited amount of time. So in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna is in this mood speaking about the temporary nature of the world and the body we live in, and also how it's important to prepare oneself for this inevitability. And he describes how yogis at the time of death are able to fix their consciousness very firmly. Prayana kale manasachalena bhaktya yukto yoga balena chaiva Gruvor mante pranamavesha samyak satam param purusham upaiti divyam. He says that yogis who practice Ashtanga yoga for many, many hundreds of years, thousands of years sometimes, have the strength of yoga at the time when they're leaving the body to be able to actually fix their mind between the two eyebrows, their concentration, and then to leave from the top of their head. There's a whole technique for leaving the body and leaving at a certain time. And in the verse it says, yoga balena, that one must have the strength of yoga to achieve this. And in the explanation of the verse, Srila Prabhupada, who translated the Bhagavad Gita as it is, gives focus to this phrase, yoga balena. And it means by the strength of yoga. And he says that one cannot suddenly, when confronted with death, decide to focus one's mind on the Supreme. But it takes practice, and one must have developed this strength over some time. Therefore, he says, one must have practiced some kind of yoga. Yoga means to link one's consciousness with the Supreme. So throughout one's life, one has to practice regularly. And if one does that, then one comes to a position of strength in yoga. Of course, in this 8th chapter that I'm describing, where Krishna talks about the strength of yoga, which is so important, especially when leaving the body, which may sound like, well, why are you wasting your whole life thinking about just this one thing? Well, according to the Srimad Bhagavatam, really the whole life is an opportunity to practice for this one final exam. In fact, the question comes up by the emperor who's got only 7 days to live. To his guru, he asks, what is the purpose of life? And his guru, Shukadeva Goswami, answers, Ante Narayana Smritihi. The purpose of life is to remember God at the time of death. That's a profound statement. That gives one a little scope to focus and also to tolerate the many changes that take place during life. Because there are a lot of changes and maybe even disappointments that happen during this lifetime. Reversals of fortune and so forth. Aren't there? Or is it just me? In fact, practically constantly, there's these kinds of disturbances. And if one thinks, I'm meant to be happy throughout this entire life, and one's destiny doesn't match that idea, then there's a lot of suffering because of meeting all kinds of reversals one after another. And therefore the Srimad Bhagavatam says, that's a short appearance. Jai Shri Shri Radha Govinda Ji Ki Jai. What was I about to say? Yeah, I know. I said that, but what was I about to say?
When you're disappointed because your destiny doesn't really give you...
Thank you. All right. I aim you for that. So, Srimad Bhagavatam says something very profound, which is applicable to everybody, which is that if you simply try to enjoy your destiny, you'll be disappointed because there's a lot of ups and downs. In fact, if anybody's had their astrological chart done yet, anybody here looked at your chart? It's a little scary, actually. Going to see the astrologer, it's like, okay, what do you have? And it's like, well, you're going to be up, and then you're going to be down, and then you're going to be down, and then you're going to be up twice, and then down 3 times, and then up 5 times. Nobody has clean sailing all the way through life. There's always ups and downs all the way through. And the Srimad Bhagavatam says that happiness comes from changing your consciousness. It doesn't come from trying to adjust to these situations externally, because you can't possibly adjust to all of them. So, the story of Gajendra is a very stark but understandable reminder about how the crocodile comes after us and will come at the least expected time. Therefore, it's important to be in preparatory mode. So the practice of bhakti means that you practice now. Of course, there are great rewards for practicing bhakti yoga. In that there's a great pleasure, actually, in taking time to contact one's actual self, spiritual self, and then experience the reciprocation between the spirit and the super spirit, which is altogether possible. Even in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna gives some indications that if you simply offer me with love and devotion, a leaf, a flower, fruit, or water, I'll accept it. He reciprocates. Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is responsive. He's responsive. That's what's exciting about Bhakti Yoga. He's responsive. And through the practice of Bhakti, one can, throughout one's life, experience Krishna's responses from within the heart and in one's external environment. And at the same time, one prepares oneself for the reversals of fortune in life. And one of the great devotees who speaks about the process of Bhakti Yoga in the Srimad Bhagavatam, Lord Brahma, says that a person who understands that whatever kinds of changes come to one during one's life are due to the inevitable destiny caused by my own thrashing around in this world. I'm simply getting exactly what I deserve for whatever I've done here in the material world, and takes those as a kind of mercy, means a kind of helpful preparation for leaving this world and then going back to the permanent world of the spiritual realm. We'll live in the exact right kind of consciousness. That is, Brahma says, one who tolerates all the different kinds of changes and difficulties that come in this life and takes them as opportunities for meeting the final exam of leaving this world, becomes eligible and develops the strength to make the final change at the time of death, to go back home, back to Godhead. And Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu came 500 years ago and taught the process of chanting the names of God as the most efficient means for constantly staying in the state of yoga or connected with God or Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And just by repeating the sacred names of God, one hears them, one feels one's tongue moving and vibrating, and the Vedic and Bhakti scriptures say that Krishna is completely present in his names, so that one is always in contact just by repeating the names of God. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu taught that the process cleanses the mirror of the heart and clarifies the consciousness. And he said that all the powers of the Supreme are there within the name. And to stay in the practice of bhakti, one should cultivate humility. There's a way in which, for instance, in modern science, there's an idea that we will force nature to give us the answers to life's secrets. We'll pry it out of her, one way or the other. Through intensive research, we'll dig deeper, climb higher, and look for ourselves. But in the process of bhakti, the great magic of humility is offered as the key to success. That if one accepts the fact that I'm helpless in this world, just like Gajendra was helpless, he attained perfection in that helpless state. When, as I said, that time comes, which comes to all of us, when he realized, I can't win, I'm going to have to leave, and I'm completely helpless. There's nothing I can do about this. In humility and helplessness, he turned to this open prayer that he gave to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The idea is that one can learn to do this preemptively. Before you have a crocodile on your leg, develop an awareness of the fact that I'm in a precarious situation. Sometimes before I chant my japa prayers in the morning, I'll sit for some time just to align my consciousness so that I don't take it for granted and I don't do it just as a mechanical process. And I think about how helpless I am at that very moment. I feel my heart beating and I think, what's making it beat? It's a volunteer. It's like, thank you very much for volunteering for this job. It just keeps beating it. And what's making him beat? You know, he could stop at any time. If he's ordered to stop, he'll just like, okay, I have to stop. I'm sorry, I can't serve you anymore. I'm going to have to stop. And then I'm really in a jam. It's really an inconvenient situation when you're counting on all this apparatus to keep working and then it just stops. So before I chant, I think, the heart's beating. Why is it beating? I can't take for granted that it'll beat even three more times. And then I feel my breath and I think, it's a great gift to even take one breath. One time when I was hiking with my father in the Sierra Mountains, we used to go backpacking a lot together. And I was walking behind him, and he had given me a hard candy to chew on or to suck on while we were walking. And I hit a rough spot in the trail, and it jarred the candy and it went down into my throat. And I was walking behind him, and I couldn't say anything. Because when your air passage is blocked, you can't speak. And I was slapping my arms as hard as I could, trying to get his attention, and he finally heard me. And he turned around. He had done some medical practice when he was in the military, and he dropped everything, threw off my backpack, picked me up by my ankles, and jerked me like that. And the candy went flying down the trail. And I just realized, well, he saved my life. And then for a long time afterwards, I was appreciating the ability to breathe. I didn't care about a lot of other things I was thinking about previously. I considered those were stupid, they were whimsical. I can breathe. And before chanting, if one can summon this kind of appreciation for the fact, I'm in a fragile condition right now, extremely fragile. It can be altered, changed at any minute. I really don't have any say over it. But if I'm Kapanaline, I'm thinking, I'm good. I'm fine. Everything's good. Prabhupada used to mention that once he went to see somebody in the hospital and they had tubes from every orifice. They were on life support, and one of the relatives said, how are you? He said, oh, I'm fine. He said, this is the fine of the material world. I don't realize that I'm actually on life support at every minute. And this Gajendra story is meant to remind me how precarious is this life. And also, how close at hand is my connection to the Supreme. In the Shirsha Upanishad, it is said, Tadejiti tanaijiti tadure tadvantike tarantarasya sarvasya taru sarvasya sivayata. Supreme Lord is far away, but he's very near as well. He's within everything, and yet he's outside of everything. So he's the closest to me of anyone. And he's called Suridam Sarvabhutanam, he's the best friend. And yet I'm looking elsewhere for my nourishment. I'm looking elsewhere. I'm trying to become self-dependent and so forth. But the prayer of Gajendra is so profound. Because actually, if you examine the text in detail, you'll see that from that position in an elephant's body, when he was in that precarious situation, he began his prayers because he remembered them from his previous life. And at first, he didn't remember who he was praying to. He didn't have a clear idea who the Supreme was. But he had a feeling that was so strong that I need help. Everyone please say, I need help.
I need help.
That's a good phrase, you know. It gets you a long way in this world. But most people, I'm okay, I'm fine, I'm Kapanaline here, don't bother me. But the prayer, Hare Krishna, it means I need help, I need help, I need help, I need help, please help me. Please help me, please help me. And if one is in this consciousness, please help me, and cries out like Gajendra, it doesn't matter where you come from, it doesn't matter what situation of life you're in right now, Krishna is responsive. He will respond to that cry. In fact, Prabhupada mentions in one of his talks about how to chant the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra, that the Lord responds to the genuine cry of a child. Why does he say the word genuine? Because there are many cries that children make, and not all of them are genuine. There's squeaky kind of noises, and there's this dry crying that you go, stop it, you're just faking. I know you're hungry, come on. But then there's the cry where the mother can hear for 3 blocks away. Everyone else is sitting there playing chess, and suddenly the mother jumps up and says, my baby's crying. She runs 3 blocks away. She can hear that genuine cry because it has a certain tone to it that all the other cries don't have. And that is, I'm really, really, really in trouble this time. I really need you. And this is humility, to admit that I'm not self-sufficient. I need help. This is humility. And in that neediness, that's when Krishna is most responsive. One of the great saints of the Bhagavatam, the Queen, Kunti Devi, tells us that if I'm aware or thinking that I'm actually okay, and that I have something to rely on in this world that's material. She says, Janmai Shraya Shutta Shibhir, Edamanamadapuman, Naivarhat Yabidatum by Twamakinchana Gochram. That those who think they have something in this world that can protect them, that can save them, like wealth, someone might think in the back of their mind, I have enough money, so if anything happens, I'll just go to the ATM machine. I'll draw on my bank account, I'll be okay, I'm protected. The Bhagavatam calls all these kinds of ideas for help in this world phantoms. Calls them fallible soldiers. Just like in India, they have this system, they have chokidars. Anybody been to India, seen the chokidars? You know chokidars, they have a little station in front of, say if you have a gated community. That's a good idea in most places. In Uttar Pradesh, they have a gated community. And then they have a little station where there's a guard that stands there for all night long and all day long, guarding. He holds a big stick. Sometimes they have these old or antique guns they carry. I'm not sure if they actually shoot. Certainly not straight. Anyway, they'll stand there, and there's so many cases that Chokidar's there for 6, 7, 10 years, guarding the place. And then when an actual crisis comes, some robbers come, they just run. I was thinking, why bother, you know? I mean, and this is the fallible soldiers. My money, my family, my government. So many ideas. Who will protect me? But when the real crisis comes, who will really protect me? None of them. They'll all run. They'll all run like a cheap chokidar. He ran like a cheap chokidar. Just remember, I coined it here too. Cheap chokidar. And that's what happens in this world. There's nothing that one can depend on. And Queen Kunti says, become aware of that. Become aware of the fact that there's nothing you can depend on in this world. Sit down, go into a meditative trance, and feel your breath, feel your heart, and see that I'm fully dependent on a higher power at every second. I don't realize it. I become full of myself, and I kapaleen, and I think I'm okay, I'm okay. But Gajendra comes to remind us, I'm not okay. I'm in a precarious position. In fact, I already have that crocodile on my leg, and one who can realize it and call out to Krishna in the mood of akinchana, which Queen Kunti says means, I don't have anything. Nothing. Purge yourself of the feeling that I have something to hold on to. And then chant, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. And it's not so hard because there are so many circumstances in this life that are trying. That may be the time, it may be the time that Gajendra came to, where the crocodile was on his leg and he realized, I can't win. Has that ever happened to anybody here? You thought, could this be the time when this is it, I can't win? Has it happened? Sometimes those are the greatest learning opportunities in the universe. We call it the teachable moment. How many of these opportunities does one get when one feels completely naked, no help from any realm? I saw it with my mother. She was a professor at San Francisco State University, taught sociology. One of the most self-reliant persons I've ever met in my life. And she appreciated Krishna consciousness, but from an intellectual point of view, her whole life. In the last 2 months of her life, she completely changed. I saw a difference in her that no longer did she take shelter of the intellect or the theories that she had studied and written about in sociology and psychology and so forth. She changed, and she became a completely different person in that final 2 months of her life. And I could see the difference between holding on, and the time when you let go. So in bhakti, the rapid advancement comes when one decides to practice like this, to really see that I'm helpless at every moment, and then to take advantage of every breath. Don't waste one. It's so valuable. You can't buy back one breath with $1 million. And if we take the lesson of Gajendra, the helplessness of Gajendra, invest in that, and see that in that moment of helplessness, as he turned to the Supreme and he cried out, "Please help me." One can do that at any time, and that's why the story is there in Gajendra. In fact, Prahlad Maharaj, who's considered the greatest saint of the Srimad Bhagavatam, was a 5-year-old boy. And Lord Nrsingadev had appeared in the world. All the demigods came to appease him by offering their prayers, and he was so angry. After killing Hiranyakashipu, his anger did not subside, so they pushed Prahlad Maharaj forward, because Lord Nrsingadev had appeared just to protect Prahlad. Prabhupada says it was like pushing a 5-year-old boy into the cage of a lion. And he went before the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, who had appeared in the form of half man, half lion. And he said, in the preamble to the prayers that he offered to him, all these great, exalted personalities, demigods, had offered perfect prayers in Sanskrit. They come from very high births. They knew how to compose prayers perfectly, but still the Lord was not satisfied. And then he suddenly remembered Gajendra, because he was saying, what can I do? I'm just a little boy. I'm only 5 years old. Not only that, I come from a very low birth. He was the son of Hiranyakashipu, the biggest demon who ever lived. So he said, how can I offer any prayer at all? I have no qualifications whatsoever. And then he thought of Gajendra. He said, Bhaktya Tatosha Bhagavan Gajayutapaya. Gajendra, although he was an elephant, just a big animal, he had some bhakti in his heart. He had this appreciation of his dependence on the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And that was enough. Even though you can imagine the prayers, they sounded very clear when he was uttering them here tonight. But what does it sound when an elephant offers prayers? What is the actual sound? I don't know how clear it is. What was that? That must have been Nanda Murari. It could have been anyone else. But it's interesting also, the Shastra says that Krishna doesn't notice your enunciation or your pronunciation. He notices the bhakti. So an animal like an elephant, go ahead, Nanda, utters a prayer like that. Krishna tastes your helplessness. He tastes your dependence. He hears, that's what he hears. He doesn't hear anything else. Nothing else is even of interest to him. So Prahlad remembered that. He said, Bhaktya Tutosha Bhagavan Gajayutapaya. An elephant, Gajendra, he's the king of elephants. He satisfied the Supreme Personality of God, Krishna, because he had that bhakti. One tiny molecule of bhakti in the heart. And you can contact the Supreme Personality of God from any position of life. Doesn't matter where you are. Doesn't matter how cold it is outside. Doesn't matter what your past has been. You can be the most depraved person in the world. And if that somehow or other you can get that one molecule of bhakti and use your human tongue. Just imagine how lucky we are to have a human tongue. There's a lot of different kinds of tongues out there. Parrots have tongues, and squirrels have tongues. Squirrels have tongues, and who else has a tongue? Turtles have tongues. Huh?
Dogs.
Dogs have tongues. But the Shastra talks about this, that there's millions and millions and millions of living entities with tongues out there. You have a very special tongue. The human tongue is the tongue that can actually say, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So we could take this lesson of Gajendra. It was such a beautiful play tonight. I've never seen such a well-staged and pristine setup. Everything was done with such precision and devotion. It was really moving, wasn't it?
Yes.
One more hand for this. So let's take away the lesson. Take away the lesson that I need help. I already have the crocodile on my leg. Don't cop a lean. Sit down and remember I'm helpless. My heart is beating as a volunteer. It can stop volunteering because, sorry, I can't come in today anymore. The breath can stop at any minute. And take full advantage of each breath, each opportunity to access that feeling that I need help. I'm completely helpless. I don't have any other shelter. And this is all that is required to advance in the process of bhakti. And it's non-sectarian. Every living entity is in the same exact situation everywhere, that they need help. Completely helpless, being swept away by the waves of this material world in a very precarious and very scary way if one actually looks at it properly. Thank you very much.
Hey.
Natcheri Armarman, Natcheri Armarman, Natcheri Armarman, Natcheri Armarman, hey, Natcheri Armarman, Natcheri Armarman, Natcheri Armarman, Natcheri Armarman.